So, hi, welcome back. And so now let's look at chapter 10. Chapter 10 goes over negotiations and relationships. So, as we go through chapter 10 on negotiations and relationships, let's see. Want to pull up the PowerPoint slide. We are going to get there. Sorry about that. All right. So, negotiation, relationships and negotiation. I want to remind you after this, I would really recommend that you also look at the media on this that links you to LinkedIn, and that learning experience there on negotiations is a great tool. I think that you'll really get a lot from it. And there's also a certificate for continuing education if you're interested in that as well. All right. So that is, like I said, a good course. I looked at it, took it myself. So I really recommend that you do that. Make some time this week to get that done. So here we go, relationships and negotiations, chapter 10. So how relationships and negotiations really have been done or have been studied. They start traditionally, researchers studied the process in two ways: actual live field situations, and then simulated complex negotiations in a laboratory. And so laboratory experimentation has dominated the area for about 50 years. And so this type of research is easier to perform, and some questions are best answered under control group conditions. And collected data efficiently control factors, and so they be confident. The researchers are confident in the results' validity. And so there are also serious problems. Their conclusions are drawn from simulations from parties having no existing or future relationship. And that's the challenge I have. From a research perspective, I'll find myself doing a lot of live research instead of in control group situations, because I want to see examples of what's really happening now. What's the take on that group? So we have existing relationships change negotiation dynamics. And so negotiating in relationships take place over time. Beyond discussions or issues, negotiation is a way to learn more about the other party and increase interdependence. Resolution of simple distributive issues has implications for the future. Distributive issues within relationship negotiations can be emotionally hot, and negotiation within relationships may never end. In many negotiations, the other person is the focal problem. And some negotiations, relationships preservation is the negotiation goal. And therefore, parties make concessions to persevere or enhance their relationship. There are forms of relationships. So in most relationships, each party's actions influence the other. And relationship is, let's break that down. How a person reacts depends on the type of relationships they have or relationship they have with the other person. Mother, daughter, manager, employee, leader, CEO, manager, down the ranks. Relationship is defined here as a pairing of entities that have meaning to the parties. And so present and future interactions influence their behavior today. There are two key assumptions. The parties have a history and an expected future with each other. and the link between the parties themselves has meaning. So there are four fundamental relationship forms. The relational models theory identifies these four types of relations. There's communal, sharing such as families, clubs, and ethnic groups, as I just stated a few moments ago, as one relationship. And there's authority, ranking such as subordinate to bosses, which I talked about as well. Um, Equality, matching as teams or groups coordinating actions. And market pricing are examples of this text is drawn from the text we're working with. Parties can enact more than one form in more than one form of their relationship. So we may be reacting as a family member and as a business. So the relational identity theory holds that people act as a tribe, and I totally agree with that. Communal sharing is shown to be cooperative, but it is also unclear whether close relations produce better solutions. I'm talking about this whole communal thing this weekend. And so elements of managing negotiations within relationships, given the complexity of some or most personal relationships, it's difficult to know which dimensions are most relevant. In this section, we discuss the effects of three important relationship components: reputation, past experience, both direct and indirect. And justice plays an important role in shaping relationship development. Trust was the most common and the most important dimension of relationships and negotiations. Now, reputation. Reputations are perpetual and highly subjective in nature. Individuals can have a number of different, even conflicting reputations. Reputations are shaped by past behaviors. Reputations are also influenced by an individual's personal characteristics and accomplishments. Reputations develop over time, and once developed, they are hard to change. And so that becomes a challenge for many people, their reputation. Other reputations can shape emotional states as well as their expectations, and then negative reputations are difficult to repair. And we know why, right? So trust is an individual's belief in and willingness to act on the words, actions, and decisions of another. The level of trust hinges on three factors. Number one, the negotiator's disposition towards the trust, a trusting personality per se. And number two, situation factors, adequate opportunity to communicate, for example, is part of the situation factors. And then third, the history of the relationship between the two parties. Research shows that there are several kinds of trust. So relationships of different depths show two types of trust: calculus-based trust and then identification-based trust. So calculus-based trust, here the concern is eschewing a consistent behavior holds that individuals do what they say they're going to do, one or two reasons. Say due to one or two reasons, they're going to do it, and then they are rewarded for keeping their word and persevering their preserving their relationships with others. And they fear the consequences of not doing what they say. Threat of punishment is largely or is likely a larger motivator than promise of reward, right? So I know with me, I have to come through on what I say I'm going to do, because if I don't come through with the promise I made, that's much worse than the performance I had. This form of trust is most consistent with the market pricing form of relationships and or early stages of other relationships that one may have. The truster calculates the value of developing trust relative to the cost of sustaining or severing the relationship. Now, identification-based trust, this is trust based on identification with other desires and intentions. So what do I really want with this and what's going on? At this level, trust exists because the parties understand each other wants. Each could effectively act for the other. You would find this type of trust in communal sharing relationships. High levels of identification-based trust are common in teams. So trust is different from distrust. Trust is confident, positive expectations of another's conduct. Distrust is confident, negative expectations of another's conduct. Combining the two types of trust with trust and distrust produces four types of trust. Calculus-based trust, and that's benefits outweigh any cost, and that's calculus-based distrust, and anticipated cost outweighs the benefits. Identification-based trust, perceived compatibility, and positive emotional attachment. And then identification-based distrust is perceived incompatibility and negative emotional attachment. Trust building and negotiation. So the four forms of trust suggest clear action strategies for negotiators who wish to build trust with another party. Now look at table 10.1 in the text, and it summarizes the suggested 26 action strategies that one should take when beginning a relationship or expecting no future relationship, be only concerned with calculus-based trust. While managing calculus-based trust, if the relationship may evolve into a communal one, establish calculus-based trust and build identification-based trust. Now, this process cannot be rushed, nor can it be one-sided. If you see identification-based distrust building, manage the boundaries of the relationship and minimize contact. So recent research on trust and negotiations established that first, the levels of trust and honesty are central to how a negotiation starts, evolves, as well as finishes. Second, trusters and trustees may focus on different things as trust is building or being built. Third, trust judgments are also governed by characteristics of the trustee. Now, trusters judge trustees on perceived ability, perceived benevolence, and perceived integrity. Finally, a large number of factors contribute to trust, and that result from trust. Now, trust enhances cooperative behavior, changes communication, and influences whether negotiation is distributive or integrated. And we talked about distributive and integrative trust or influences earlier. Bilateral trust and negotiation is when what we saw with one study looked at attributes of the truster, the trustee, and the attributes of the shared parties. Positive truster attributes and pro-social orientation built trust. So power differences had no impact on trust development, and power differences had no pro-social orientation built into the trust. So for joint attributes, a previous relationship and small talk built trust. There was insufficient studies on trustee attributes though. Now, another study looked at trust in simulated negotiations, and the propensity towards trust led to trust development. Those with higher trust looked for common interests using questions, and those with lower trust argue issues one at a time. So trust repair. Now, there are three major strategies for repairing trust, okay? They're verbal accounts, which apologies are the most common, but all six elements must be present for the most effective apologies, okay? Reparations. The amount of money was less critical than the offer itself. And then structural solutions. This is an effort to create rules, regulations, and procedures to minimize future trust violations. And then the strengthening with fines and penalties for rules and violations. Now let's talk about the forms of justice. So distributive justice concerns the distributions of outcomes. while procedural justice concerns the processing of determining outcomes. Rational justice is about how the parties treat each other. Interpersonal justice reflects how much respect authority figures use, where informational justice reflects on how much truth and honesty prevails. Now, systematic justice is about how organizations treat groups and the norms that develop for how they should be treated. So justice research conclusions are: the procedural justice effect holds parties involved in the decision are more committed to the decision. Procedural justice is strongly related to integrative outcomes, and negotiators are encouraged to think about fairness. We're more cooperative in distributive negotiations. Also, parties receiving unfair offers may reject them due to anger. Here, intangibles enter the picture. Establishment of an objective standard has a positive impact. Judgments about fairness are subject to cognitive biases. Justice issues arise when creating specific job duties, and these forms of justice are often intertwined. Relationship among justice and trust. Reputations, trust, and justice all interact in shaping expectations of others' behavior. What reputation you have, do I trust you? And is there justice in what you do? Or how your negotiation that you brought to the table is going to be fair or not? So when one party feels the other has acted fairly in the past, they are more likely to trust the other. Studies of relationships over time show that interrelational justice has or was the most significant predictor of trust. So that interrational actional relationship is better. So procedural and interpersonal justice were predictors of how trustworthy the other would behave in the future. And conversely, unfair treatment is likely to lead to distrust and bad reputation. And that's a given. So how do you repair in repairing a relationship? What do you need to do? Well, here are some diagnostic questions you can use to improve a relationship. Number one, what might be causing any present misunderstandings? And what can I do to understand it better? What might be causing a lack of trust? And what can I do to begin to repair that trust that may have been broken? What might be causing one or both of us to feel coerced? And what can I do to put the focus on persuasion rather than coercion? What might be causing one or both of us to feel disrespected? And what can I do to demonstrate acceptance and respect? Finally, what may be causing one or both of us to get upset? And what can I do to balance emotion and reason? These are some great questions for any type of repair of relationship, whether it be personal, professional, or otherwise business. And these are great questions to ask ourselves. And so that's it for chapter 10. This has been a great chapter. We talked a lot in this chapter, again, about relationships and negotiations and how they've been studied over the last 50 years, mostly in incubators or test labs. But all in all, we talked about the mere fact of that these relationships are just very important. How do you repair those relationships in order to get the best outcomes from them now and in the future? And so that's it for chapter 10. Like I said earlier, please, please, please consider doing the video, looking at the media, and it links to LinkedIn And I think you're going to get a lot from that exercise. And it's worth the certificate in it. Come on, it's free. All right. Take care. And I'll look forward to you next or in our next chapter.